Silent night played like a gentle prayer outside, but inside my father's kitchen, the only sound was my stepmother's hand cracking across my face. At 26 years old, the metallic taste of blood mixed with the smell of roast chicken made me feel small again. She had no idea a delivery man was frozen on the porch, his body camera capturing every scream. That recording would destroy her perfect mask faster than she could say, "Amen." My name is Neve Larson. I am 26 years old, and as I stood behind the floor-to-ceiling glass of my penthouse living room, the world below looked like a complex circuit board that I had finally learned to control. I was standing in a skyloft that cost $6.8 million, perched at the very top of the Skyline Crown Residences in the coastal city of Harborview. The glass was triple-paned and soundproof, designed to keep the chaos of the city out, but it could not filter the memories that were currently vibrating through the floorboards. Below me, Liberty Plaza was bleeding with the festive colors of red and green. From 40 stories up, the people were just specks of dust moving in predictable patterns. I could see the massive fir tree, lit by over 50,000 LED bulbs, standing as the centerpiece of the plaza. Near its base, a choir was assembling. Even through the engineering marvel of my windows, the faint, low-frequency hum of the brass section reached me. They were rehearsing. It was Silent Night. Of course it was. It is always that song. The melody drifted up like rising smoke, carrying a chill that the sophisticated climate control system of my apartment could not filter out. It is funny how a song about heavenly peace can trigger a physical reflex to protect your face. My phone buzzed against the cool surface of the Italian marble kitchen island. The sound was sharp in the silence of the apartment. I did not need to look to know who it was, but I looked anyway. The screen lit up with a notification from Victoria. "Christmas Eve this year will just be Dad, me, and Brielle. You are probably too busy anyway." I stared at the words. The message was a masterclass in passive aggression. It was light, airy, and designed to draw blood without leaving a visible mark. It said, "We do not want you," while pretending to be considerate of a schedule she knew nothing about. For years, messages like this would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and frantic logistical maneuvering. The old Nevaeh, the one who still thought love was something you could earn through servitude, would have typed out a paragraph in response. I would have explained my schedule. I would have offered to bring the expensive wine they liked. I would have begged for a seat at a table where I was not welcome, just to prove I was part of the family. But today, the air in the skyloft felt different. It was crisp. It was sterile. It was mine. I picked up the phone and typed 4 letters. Good. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the marble. That was it. No heartbeat skipping. No tears pricking the corners of my eyes. No desperate follow-up text asking if they needed help with the cooking. The waiting was over. My family had absolutely no idea who I really was. To Victoria, my father David, and my golden child stepsister Brielle, I was just Neve the plotter. Neve the boring logistics manager who worked in a warehouse and probably lived in a cramped studio apartment. They thought my distance was due to shame or poverty. They did not know that the busy schedule they mocked had involved finalizing the sale of my company. They did not know that Circuit Bridge, the medical logistics startup I co-founded 3 years ago to fix broken supply chains for rural hospitals, had just been acquired by a major conglomerate. The buyout was finalized last Tuesday for over $90 million. My share alone was enough to buy this building if I wanted to, but I settled for the penthouse. I looked around the room. The aesthetic was minimalist, dominated by whites, grays, and natural stone. It was the complete opposite of the cluttered, suffocating house in Maple Ridge. This apartment, with the view that stretched all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, was bought through a shell company. The name Larson appears nowhere on the deed. The doorman knows me as Ms. Vance. The neighbors do not know me at all. I slid the heavy glass door open and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind off the ocean was biting, instantly stinging my cheeks, but I welcomed it. This was my private balcony. It wrapped around the entire corner of the building, a suspended garden of concrete and glass that offered a 360-degree view of the city. From here, the giant Christmas tree in the plaza looked small, manageable. I had owned this place for 6 months, and not a single member of my family had ever set foot in the lobby, let alone up here. This was my sanctuary, a place built on competence and precision, two things that did not exist in the Larson household. I leaned against the railing, the metal cold under my palms. I pulled my phone out again, but not to text Victoria. I opened my banking app. It was a habit I was trying to break, but the anger was a good fuel today, and I needed to top up the tank. I scrolled through the automated transfers I sent to my father every month. $2,000 on the 1st of the month, $1,500 on the 15th, another $1,000 for emergency repairs last week. My father, David Larson, always called with a voice low and apologetic. He would talk about unexpected bills, the roof leaking, the car transmission failing, or the heating bill spiking because of the winter freeze. I am short this month. Navaya. Just a little help until the pension kicks in. I looked down at the plaza, my eyes narrowing. I knew exactly where that money went. It did not go to the roof. It went to the crystal nativity scene Victoria just had to have for the church lawn to prove she was the most devout woman in the parish. It went to the catering for her exclusive charity gala where she played the saint in a dress that cost more than my first car. It went to Brielle's voice lessons and her studio rent. My money, earned from sleepless nights routing emergency insulin deliveries during blizzards and optimizing truck routes until my eyes burned, was being used to polish the halo of the woman who made my childhood a living hell. The choir below swelled, their voices carrying the chorus up the side of the skyscraper, "Sleep in heavenly peace." My hand involuntarily went to my left cheek. It was a phantom sensation, a sting that was not there, but felt as real as the cold railing under my grip. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. The smell of roast chicken, the scent of expensive cinnamon candles, the way the light hit the wine glass in my father's hand as he looked away, and the sound, that sickening crack of skin against skin. Let me be clear about something. This is not a story about how I got rich. This is not a rags to riches fairy tale where money fixes the hole in your chest. You can buy a penthouse, but you cannot buy a new past. You can wear a $4,000 coat, but it does not stop the cold from settling in your bones when you remember being 19 and homeless for a night because your stepmother decided you were taking up too much space. This is a story about the night my stepmother beat me while that song played. It is about the smell of roast chicken and expensive candles masking the scent of my own fear. And most importantly, it is about the delivery man standing on the porch who heard everything. He was the variable Victoria never calculated. She thought she was performing for an empty house, but the audience was already at the door. I turned back inside, the cold air following me into the warmth of the living room. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the leather cool against my legs. I unlocked my phone again, but this time I did not open my personal messages or my bank account. I opened the admin interface of Circuit Bridge. I still had override access. Part of the buyout deal was that I stayed on as a lead consultant for 6 months to ensure the transition of the routing algorithms. I built this system. I knew every line of code, every driver profile, and every loophole. I navigated to the driver manifest for the Maple Ridge region. The list populated instantly, dozens of names scrolling by with their current status and ratings. I scrolled past the new hires, past the seasonal workers, until I found him. Noah Carter. He was active. His rating was 5 stars. Of course it was. Noah was the kind of driver who treated a box of aspirin with the same respect as a box of diamonds. He was quiet, efficient, and observant. He had been there in the background of my life for years, a ghost in a uniform, seeing things others missed. I tapped his profile. My heart rate remained steady, barely rising above 60 beats per minute. This was just logistics. This was just routing. I selected the option to create a new order, manual entry, priority status, critical, destination, the Larson residence, 42 Oak Street, Maple Ridge, Ohio, delivery window, 8 o'clock in the evening. December 24th. I paused at the notes section. This was the part that mattered. I typed slowly, ensuring every word was precise. Internal note for driver, N. Carter. Do not ring the bell until you receive the text signal. Keep the body camera rolling. This is a compliance check. It was a lie. Technically, it was not a compliance check for the company. It was a compliance check for my life. I reviewed the order details one last time. The total cost for the priority shipping was negligible, but the value of what was about to happen was incalculable. I pressed the confirm button. The screen flashed green. Order processed. I stood up and walked back to the window. The choir had finished their song and was dispersing. The lights on the tree seemed to blur slightly as the first flakes of snow began to fall against the glass. Victoria thought she had won by uninviting me. She thought she had cut the cord. She did not realize that by cutting the cord, she had set me free. And she certainly did not realize that I was not just coming home for dinner, I was coming home to work. The trap was set. It was time to go home for the holidays. To understand how a 26-year-old woman ends up watching her family from a sniper's distance in a multi-million-dollar penthouse, you have to understand the geography of Maple Ridge, Ohio. It is the kind of town that looks like it was manufactured inside a snow globe. Every lawn is manicured, every fence is white, and during December, every roof is outlined in tasteful warm white string lights. It is a place where appearance is not just important. It is the only religion that truly matters. My mother died when I was 7. I do not remember much about the funeral, but I remember the silence that settled over our house afterwards. It was a dusty, heavy silence. My father, David Larson, did not know how to fill it. He was a man of manuals and quiet routines, a mechanic who understood how to fix a carburetor but had no tools for fixing a grieving heart. So, when Victoria walked into his life 2 years later, he did not just marry her because he loved her. He married her because she was loud enough to drown out the quiet. Victoria brought noise, she brought organization, and she brought Brielle. Brielle and I were both 9 years old when they moved in. We were the same height, had the same shoe size, and attended the same grade at Maple Ridge Elementary. That was where the similarities ended. Brielle was blonde, effervescent, and naturally demanded the center of every room she entered. I was dark-haired, quiet, and had already learned that the safest place to be was the corner. To the neighbors, Victoria was a saint. She was the woman who baked casseroles for sick parishioners and organized the church bake sale. But the Victoria who existed inside the walls of our 2-story colonial on Oak Street was a different creature entirely. She was not physically violent, not back then. She did not hit. She did not throw things. Instead, she used a scalpel of words and sighs to carve out the hierarchy of our new family. The hierarchy was simple. Victoria and Brielle were the family. David was the provider, and I was the staff. Christmas in Maple Ridge was a production, and in the Larson house, I was the stagehand. By the time I was 12, the holiday season did not mean magic to me. It meant labor. The first week of December, Victoria would hand me a checklist. It was written on thick, cream-colored stationery, her handwriting looping and elegant. Vacuum behind the sofa. Polish the silver candlesticks. Iron the table linens. Peel the potatoes. Wrap the gifts. I remember one Saturday specifically. I was 12 years old. The kitchen was hot. The windows fogged up from the boiling water on the stove. I was standing at the island, peeling 5 pounds of russet potatoes for the church potluck. My hands were cramping, and the starch was drying white and itchy on my wrists. In the living room, just 10 feet away, Brielle was practicing for the Christmas pageant. She was wearing a red velvet dress that Victoria had bought from a boutique in the city. It cost $80, which was a fortune to me. I was wearing a hand-me-down sweatshirt that had once belonged to a cousin I barely knew. Brielle stood by the fireplace, her voice clear and high, singing Silent Night. Victoria sat on the sofa, a cup of tea in her hand, her eyes locked on her daughter with a look of rapture I had never seen directed at me. "Higher, sweetie," Victoria would say, her voice dripping with honey. "Project your voice. Let the whole neighborhood hear you." I dropped a peeled potato into the pot. It made a splash of boiling water hit my arm. I flinched, biting my lip to keep from making a sound. I knew if I cried out, I would be ruining the rehearsal. I would be the distraction. "Nava, quiet in there," Victoria called out without turning her head. "Brielle is concentrating." That was the dynamic. Brielle was the art. I was the utility. Brielle was the ornament on the tree. I was the wire hook that held it up, invisible and functional. It was not that my father did not see it. He saw it. David Larson was not a blind man. He was a man who had made a calculation. He saw the peace Victoria brought to his life, the cooked meals, the ironed shirts, the social standing, and he decided the price for that peace was my comfort. I remember asking him once, while he was in the garage changing the oil in his truck, why I had to do all the chores while Brielle got to go to voice lessons and drama camp. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag and looked at his boots. "Victoria just wants you to be prepared for the real world." "Nevea," he said, his voice flat. "You are strong. You are practical. Brielle, she is sensitive. She needs more support. You do not need to be coddled." "You are strong." It sounded like a compliment. It took me years to realize it was actually a dismissal. By labeling me as strong, he absolved himself of the responsibility to protect me. If I was strong, I did not need him to stand up to Victoria. If I was strong, I could take the weight. He weaponized my resilience so he could remain comfortable in his passivity. The moment that truly cemented my place in the house happened the Christmas I turned 14. We were hosting the big dinner for the extended family and some of the church deacons. The dining room table was set with the good china, the pieces with the gold rim that I was forbidden to touch unless I was washing them. There were 12 seats at the table. I had counted them as I set the forks and knives, measuring the distance between the plates with a ruler just the way Victoria demanded. 12 seats. When guests started arriving, the house filled with the smell of roast turkey and expensive perfume. I had spent the entire day in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, and plating. I was exhausted, but I was also hungry. And for once, I was looking forward to sitting down. Victoria swept into the kitchen, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. She looked at me, then at the dining room, then back at me. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone light and breezy, as if she were commenting on the weather. "We have a slight problem. The Johnsons brought their 2 toddlers, and we are out of space at the main table." I looked at the dining room. There were 12 chairs. There were 12 adults, if you counted Brielle, who was sitting next to the pastor, laughing at something he said. "But I set a place for me," I said, my voice quiet. "I know," Victoria said, taking a sip of wine, "but Brielle needs to sit there to talk to the pastor about the solo for the midnight mass, and obviously, we cannot split up the couples. So, you will be fine at the kitchen table, right? You can keep an eye on the babies." She did not wait for an answer. She picked up the plate I had set for myself at the main table and moved it to the small, round laminate table in the breakfast nook. She placed it next to 2 high chairs where the Johnson toddlers were already smearing mashed potatoes on the trays. I looked at my father. He was standing in the doorway of the dining room, holding a carving knife. He heard her. I know he heard her. Our eyes met for a second. I waited for him to say something. I waited for him to say, "No, Victoria, Nevea is 14. She sits with the family." Instead, he cleared his throat, looked down at the turkey, and turned back to the guests. "Who wants white meat?" he asked loudly. I sat at the kitchen table that night, listening to the laughter drifting in from the dining room. I sat between 2 screaming toddlers who threw peas at me. I ate my cold turkey, and I felt something inside me harden. It was not a break. It was a calcification, like a bone healing stronger after a fracture. That was the night I stopped trying to earn my seat. I realized that no matter how clean the silver was, no matter how perfect the potatoes were, I would never be invited to the main table. I was useful, but I was not wanted. From that day on, silence became my armor. I stopped complaining. I stopped asking. I stopped trying to insert myself into their conversations. When Victoria praised Brielle's grades, which were lower than mine, I said nothing. When Brielle got a laptop for her birthday and I got a set of flannel sheets, I said thank you and took them to my room. I found my own sanctuary. It was not in the house. It was in the detached garage where my father kept his tools. It smelled of old oil, sawdust, and gasoline. It was cold in the winter, but it was honest. Machines were honest. If an engine did not start, it was not because it didn't like you. It was because a spark plug was misfiring or a fuel line was clogged. There was a logic to it. I spent hours out there, sitting on a milk crate, reading textbooks on mechanics and systems. I watched my father work sometimes. We rarely spoke. The silence between us in the garage was different from the silence in the house. In the house, the silence was heavy with things unsaid. In the garage, the silence was just the absence of noise. It was peaceful. I learned to take things apart and put them back together. I learned that every system, no matter how complex, has a flow. If you can control the flow, you can control the outcome. It was the first lesson in logistics I ever learned, and I learned it while hiding from my own family. The climax of those years always happened on Christmas Eve at the church service. The entire town of Maple Ridge would pack into the pews. The air would smell of pine boughs and beeswax candles. I remember standing in the back row one year. I was 16. I had arrived separately because there wasn't enough room in the car for me and Brielle's costume changes. Victoria and David were in the front row, beaming. The lights in the sanctuary dimmed, leaving only the candles flickering. A spotlight hit the pulpit. Brielle stepped into the light. She looked angelic. Her blonde hair curled perfectly, her robe white and pristine. She opened her mouth, and the first notes of Silent Night floated out over the congregation. Silent night, holy night. The congregation watched her with adoration. My father watched her with pride. Victoria watched her with triumph. I stood in the shadows at the back, near the heavy oak doors. I was wearing a coat that was too thin for the Ohio winter, because Victoria said a new coat wasn't in the budget that year. I watched them, and I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't jealousy, it was erasure. I realized that if I turned around, opened the heavy doors, and walked out into the snow, nobody would notice. If I kept walking until I reached the highway, if I got on a bus and never came back, the service would continue, the song would finish, they would go home and drink eggnog and open presents. They might notice I was gone when it was time to do the dishes, but not before. All is calm, all is bright. I looked at Brielle in the light, and then I looked at my hands in the dark. They were red from the cold and rough from scrubbing pots. If I disappear, I thought, the realization settling over me like the falling snow outside, no one will even see the empty space I leave behind. And in that moment, standing in the back of the church while the town sang about heavenly peace, I decided that one day, I would not just disappear, I would ascend. I would build a world where I was not just visible, but undeniable. But for now, I buttoned my thin coat, leaned against the cold wall, and let the darkness swallow me whole. The envelope in my hand was heavy, the kind of weight that promised a future different from the one designated for me in Maple Ridge. I was 17 years old, standing in the kitchen with the morning sun hitting the linoleum floor, feeling a spark of pride that I foolishly thought might be contagious. It was an acceptance letter from the Lakeport Institute of Technology, offering me a full scholarship to their supply chain management and systems engineering program. I had applied in secret, using the library computer during my lunch breaks. I had written the essay on the back of old math homework, refining my arguments about efficiency and flow until they were sharp enough to cut. And now, I held the proof that someone, somewhere, thought I was worth investing in. I walked into the kitchen. Victoria was at the counter, vigorously whisking eggs for an omelet that I knew was mostly for Brielle. My father was drinking his coffee, staring at the sports section of the newspaper. I placed the letter on the table, right on top of the sports page. I got in, I said, my voice steady but tight with suppressed excitement. Full ride, tuition, books, and lab fees. It is all covered. My father blinked, pulling his reading glasses down his nose to look at the letterhead. He did not smile. He looked at the paper as if it were a bill he did not know how to pay. "Lakeport," he muttered. "That is in the city. That is almost 4 hours away by bus." Navaya. Victoria stopped whisking. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked over. Leaning over my father's shoulder, she scanned the letter, her eyes narrowing not at the achievement, but at the logistics. Her logistics. 4 hours, she repeated, her tone dripping with a faux concern that masked her irritation. "Well, that is inconvenient. If you go all the way up there, you certainly will not be able to come back every weekend. And what about Christmas? The buses are a nightmare in December." She looked at me, her face arranging itself into a mask of disappointed martyrdom. "It is a shame, really," she sighed. "Just when the holiday season ramps up, we are going to be short a set of hands. I was counting on you to handle the decorations for the church hall this year. Brielle is going to be so busy with her solos." There it was. Not congratulations. Not, "We are proud of you." Just a calculation of lost labor. To her. My education was not a stepping stone. It was a staffing issue. My father cleared his throat, looking for a practical objection to hide his emotional distance behind. "Even with tuition covered, there is room and board," he said, tapping the table. "Dorms are expensive. Nevaya, I do not have $5,000 or $6,000 lying around to set you up in the city." I was ready for this. I had been ready for this since I was 14 and realized that in this house, I was my own financial safety net. "I have it covered. Dad," I said, pulling a small notebook out of my pocket. "I have been working at Mr. Henderson's appliance repair shop on weekends for 2 years. I have $3,400 saved for the deposit and the first month's expenses. The scholarship includes a stipend for housing if I maintain a 3.8 grade point average. I did the math. You do not have to pay a cent." Silence stretched across the kitchen. It was the sound of excuses dying. I saw a flicker of something in my father's eyes. Maybe shame, maybe relief, probably a mix of both. He realized he had no grounds to say no. He also realized he had no part in this victory. He looked at Victoria, then back at me. He folded the newspaper. "Well," he said, taking a sip of his coffee, "it sounds like you have made up your mind. It is up to you." Then. That was it. No hug, no celebratory dinner. Victoria just went back to her eggs, the whisk hitting the glass bowl with a little more force than necessary. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said over the noise. "Logistics? Warehouses? It sounds very dirty, very industrial. Brielle is looking at liberal arts programs, something with a little more culture." I left for Lakeport 3 months later on a Tuesday morning. The bus left at 6:15. The house was quiet. I dragged my 2 suitcases down the driveway, the plastic wheels rumbling loudly against the asphalt, sounding like thunder in the morning stillness. Nobody got up to see me off. There was no sandwich packed in wax paper for the road. There was no tearful goodbye at the door. I looked back at the house once, seeing the dark windows of Brielle's room where she was sleeping warmly, dreaming of a future that would be handed to her on a silver platter. Years later, when Brielle went off to college, there would be a party. There would be a photo shoot on the front lawn with balloons spelling out her graduation year. Victoria would post a 500-word essay on social media about her pride and joy leaving the nest. But for me, there was just the hiss of the bus brakes and a driver who did not care who I was as long as I had the $30 fare. My first Christmas away from Maple Ridge was the year I truly fell in love with the world of supply chains. I did not go home. I told my father I had to study for finals, but the truth was I had taken a night shift job at a major distribution center on the edge of Lakeport. While Brielle was undoubtedly wearing red velvet and singing hymns in a candlelit church, I was wearing steel-toed boots and a high-visibility vest, standing on a metal gantry overlooking a floor the size of 4 football fields. It was chaotic, loud, and smelled of diesel and cardboard. To anyone else, it looked like madness. Forklifts zipped around like angry beetles. Conveyor belts roared. Men shouted over the noise of hydraulics. But I watched it, and I saw a symphony. I saw the way a package moved from the intake dock to the sorting belt in 45 seconds. I saw how a delay in Zone B caused a ripple effect that slowed down the loading trucks in Zone D by 12 minutes. I saw the invisible lines connecting everything. I spent my Christmas Eve tracking a shipment of emergency medical supplies destined for a hospital in Cleveland. The truck had blown a tire. The driver was stranded. The dispatcher was panicking. I looked at the map on the screen. I saw a secondary truck returning empty from a delivery in Toledo. It was only 20 miles from the stranded driver. "Reroute Unit 402, I told the shift supervisor, pointing at the screen. "He can pick up the cargo and still make the hospital delivery window by 11 o'clock. The supervisor, a gruesome man who usually ignored the college kids, looked at the map, then at me. He radioed the order. The cargo made it. That night, eating a vending machine sandwich in the break room while Silent Night played tinny and distorted over the warehouse speakers, I felt a rush of power I had never felt in my father's house. I was useful here. Not useful like a servant, but useful like a brain. I mattered. And yet, the conditioning of a childhood spent begging for scraps of affection is a hard thing to break. Despite the freedom I found in Lakeport, despite the fact that I was building a life where I was respected, I still went back. For the next 4 years, I dragged myself back to Maple Ridge for every major holiday. It is a sickness, really, the hope that this time will be different. You convince yourself that because you have changed, because you are smarter, stronger, and more successful, they will finally see you. You think that if you walk through the door wearing a blazer and talking about your internship at a national logistics firm, they will realize they were wrong to dismiss you. But toxic families do not work that way. They do not update their mental files on you. To them. I was not Nevaeh the scholarship student or the logistics prodigy. I was just Nevaeh the background noise, Nevaeh the inconvenience. I remember the Christmas I was 21. I was in my senior year, already scouting job offers with starting salaries higher than my father's annual income. I came home with a bottle of expensive wine and a desire to share my world with them. We were sitting in the living room. The tree was perfect, decorated entirely in gold and white that year because Victoria had read in a magazine that multicolored lights were tacky. Brielle was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She was attending a community college nearby, mostly majoring in social life. "I got the lead in the spring production," Brielle announced without looking up. "It is a modern retelling of Romeo and Juliet. I have to memorize 400 lines. It is going to be so exhausting." Victoria clapped her hands, her eyes shining. "Oh, honey, that is wonderful. You were born for the stage. We will have to get you a new wardrobe for rehearsals. You cannot show up looking like just anyone." David nodded, smiling. "That is great, Princess." I saw an opening, a chance to join the conversation of adult achievements. "I actually just finished a big project too," I said, leaning forward. "My team redesigned the routing algorithm for the campus shuttle system. We cut fuel consumption by 15% and reduced wait times by an average of 4 minutes. The dean is talking about patenting the model." I waited for the wow. I waited for the good job. Victoria took a sip of her wine and sighed. A long, bored sound that sucked the air out of the room. "Nevaeh, please," she said, offering me a tight, pitying smile. "It is Christmas Eve. Let's not bore everyone with talk about buses and gas mileage. It is so dry. Can't you just enjoy the holiday without trying to turn everything into a math problem?" My father chimed in, eager to agree with her. "Yeah, Nevaeh, relax. You are always so intense about work. It is not very feminine to be obsessing over trucks and engines all the time. Guys get intimidated by that kind of thing." I felt the familiar heat rising in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was humiliation. I was talking about saving money and improving lives. Brielle was talking about playing dress-up, but in the twisted economy of the Larson household, her contribution was gold, and mine was dust. Brielle looked up from her phone and giggled. "Yeah, Nevaeh, maybe if you focused less on bus routes and more on your hair, you'd have a date to bring home." Victoria laughed. It was a sharp, tinkling sound. "Oh, stop teasing your sister." Brielle, not everyone can be a star. Someone has to drive the bus, right? They all laughed then. Even my father chuckled, shaking his head as if the idea of me being anything more than a bus driver was a fond, silly joke. I sat there, holding my glass of wine, and I realized something terrifying. I could become the President of the United States, and to them, I would still just be the girl who didn't fit at the main table. Their perception of me was a locked room, and I did not have the key. I never would. The next morning, I packed my bag. I told them I had been called back for an emergency shift. It was a lie. I just couldn't breathe the air in that house for another second. Victoria didn't even look up from her tablet when I walked to the door. "Leaving so soon?" she asked absently. "Well, try not to track snow in on your way out." The foyer was just mopped. I walked to the bus station in the slush. The town was quiet, sleeping off its holiday hangover. I boarded the Greyhound, taking a seat near the back. The bus smelled of wet wool and stale coffee. I put my headphones in. My playlist was on shuffle, and by some cruel cosmic joke, a choral version of Silent Night began to play. Sleep in heavenly peace. I looked out the window as the bus pulled away from Maple Ridge, watching the manicured lawns and the white fences blur into gray static. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I was 21 years old. I had a 4.0 grade point average. I had a bank account with $5,000 in it. I was going to be someone. I pulled the headphone cord, turning the volume up until the music drowned out the sound of the engine. "I will come back," I whispered to the empty seat next to me. "I will come back one more time. But next time, I won't be looking for their approval. I won't be looking for a seat at their table. Next time, if I come back, it will be because I want to, not because I need them." I did not know then that it would take 5 more years for me to truly break the chain. I did not know that the next time I tried to leave, it would be with a bruised face and a police report. But as the bus hit the highway, speeding toward the city where I was a person who mattered, I felt the first true crack in the foundation of my loyalty. I was done being the stagehand. It was time to start writing my own script. I was 24 years old when I decided to drive back to Maple Ridge with a foolish, fragile thing tucked in my chest called hope. I had been working for 2 years as a junior logistics coordinator at a medical supply firm in the city. I paid my own rent. I paid my own taxes. I had a 401k retirement plan and a set of keys to my own apartment. By all metrics of modern adulthood, I was independent. But there is a strange gravity that exists in childhood homes. It does not matter how tall you grow or how much money you make. The moment you cross the threshold of the house you grew up in, the atmosphere compresses you. You shrink. You revert. I parked my car, a sensible 3-year-old sedan that I had bought with my own savings, in the driveway. The house was glowing. Victoria had outdone herself this year. There were electric candles in every window, and a wreath on the door that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I took a deep breath, staring at the steering wheel. Just one more time, I told myself, maybe now that I am an adult, now that I am not asking them for anything, they will treat me like a guest. Maybe we can just be 2 women and a father having dinner. I was wrong before I even took my coat off. I walked through the front door, carrying a bottle of Pinot Noir and a box of expensive chocolates. The heat in the house was stifling, smelling of cinnamon and roasting meat. Victoria did not say hello. She did not ask about my drive. She was standing in the middle of the living room, holding her phone up to record the television screen. "Shh," she hissed, waving a manicured hand at me without turning around. "It is starting. Do not make a sound." On the massive 60-inch screen mounted above the fireplace, the live stream of the Maple Ridge Community Church service was playing. The camera zoomed in on the altar. Brielle was there. She was 24, just like me. But she looked like a porcelain doll in a shimmering silver gown. She was holding a microphone, her eyes closed in performed reverence. I stood in the entryway, holding my gifts, feeling like a delivery girl who had walked in on a private ceremony. Victoria was typing furiously on her phone, sending updates to her prayer group chat. "My angel is about to sing. Everyone tune in. so proud. My father was sitting in his recliner, a glass of eggnog in his hand. He looked at me, gave a tight, uncomfortable smile, and then looked back at the TV.
"Hey, Naval," he muttered. "You made good time."
Brielle began to sing. Her voice was technically proficient, clear and practiced, filling the living room with the opening lines of Silent Night. Victoria finally lowered her phone and looked at me. Her eyes scanned my outfit, jeans and a cashmere sweater, with a critical, dismissing glint. "Well, you are here," she said. "Put those things down. The turkey needs to be basted, and the green beans need to be sautéed. I have been too busy managing Brielle's fan club to deal with the sides. There is an apron in the pantry. Try not to get grease on your sweater, though that color does look a bit washed out anyway." The hope in my chest cracked a little. I was a logistics coordinator. I managed fleets of trucks. I solved complex supply chain crises. But in this house, I was still just the help. I did not argue. I walked into the kitchen, put the wine on the counter, and tied the apron around my waist. I basted the turkey. I sautéed the beans. I set the table. I did it all while Brielle's voice drifted in from the other room, singing about heavenly peace. Dinner was served an hour later. Brielle was still at the church, soaking up the applause. So it was just the three of us. The dynamic was suffocating. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flush with the excitement of her daughter's performance. She poured herself a glass of the wine I had brought without acknowledging who bought it. "So," she started, cutting into her turkey with surgical precision. "How is life in the big city? I assume you are finding it terribly crowded. I saw a report on the news about the crime rates. I do not know how you stand it. Maple Ridge must seem so boring and provincial to you now that you are a city girl." Her tone was light, but the trap was obvious. If I agreed, I was arrogant. If I disagreed, I was a failure who missed home. "It is fine," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It is busy. My job keeps me occupied." "Ah, yes, the warehouse thing," she said, waving her fork, moving boxes around. I put my fork down. I felt a flash of irritation. "It is not moving boxes. Victoria," I said, "I am working on a new system to optimize medicine delivery to rural clinics. We are trying to cut delivery times by 30% for critical antibiotics. It is actually really important work. It saves lives." I looked at my father, hoping for a nod, a spark of interest. "Your daughter is doing something good. Dad, look at me." He just chewed his food, his eyes fixed on his plate. Victoria laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Well, that is very noble, I am sure," she said. "But let us be honest, Nava, it is not exactly a career that attracts high-value men, is it? Brielle is dating a junior associate at a law firm. He comes from old money in Columbus. Financial stability is so much more important than trying to save the world with spreadsheets. A woman needs to think about her future. And frankly, driving trucks, or telling trucks where to go, does not scream wife material to the kind of men who matter." The air in the room seemed to vanish. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had never worked a day in the 15 years she had been married to my father, lecturing me about financial stability while spending his pension on silver gowns. "I am not looking for a husband to pay my bills," I said, my voice hardening. "I pay my own bills. I am proud of what I do." Victoria's smile faltered. She did not like the tone. She did not like the resistance. "There is no need to be defensive. Nevaeh," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I am just trying to give you advice. You have always been so rough around the edges. We just want you to be happy, or at least secure." I looked at my father. "Dad," I asked, "do you think my job is rough? Do you think what I do is worthless?" My father stopped chewing. He looked up, panic in his eyes. He looked at Victoria, then at me. I think it is good you have a job, Nevaeh," he stammered. "Let's not argue at dinner. It is Christmas Eve." Let's not argue. The coward's prayer. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a cable finally giving way under 24 years of tension. "I am not arguing," I said. my voice rising slightly. "I am trying to have a conversation, but I am tired. Dad, I drove 4 hours to get here. I cooked this dinner. I bought this wine. And since I walked in the door, I have been treated like a servant and told my life is a joke." Victoria slammed her hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "That is enough," she shouted. "How dare you? I invite you into my home, and you start disrespecting me?" "Your home?" I shot back. "This is my father's home. I grew up here." "And you are ruining the night." Victoria stood up, her face flushing red. "Just like you always do. Always the victim. Always the dark cloud." On the television in the living room, the service was replaying. Brielle's face filled the screen again. The piano intro to Silent Night began for the second time. The contrast was nauseating. The gentle, holy music swelling in the background while hatred curdled on the dinner table. I stood up too. "I am not a victim, Victoria, and I am not a child anymore. You cannot talk to me like this." "I want to speak to you in the kitchen," she said, her voice turning into a low, dangerous growl. "Now." "David, say something," I said, looking at him. He took a long sip of his wine and looked away. "Fine," I said. I followed her into the kitchen. As soon as I crossed the threshold, she grabbed the handle of the sliding door and slammed it shut, cutting us off from the dining room, but not from the sound of the television. Brielle's voice filtered through the wood, singing "All is calm, all is bright." Victoria turned on me. The mask of the polite society lady was gone. Her face was twisted in a snarl. "You ungrateful little brat," she spat, stepping into my personal space. "I raised you. I put a roof over your head. And you come back here with your cheap city attitude and try to humiliate me in front of your father?" "You didn't raise me," I said, standing my ground. "You tolerated me. There is a difference." She stepped closer. I could smell the wine on her breath. I was taller than her now. I was stronger. But I was still frozen by the old conditioning. "You are nothing," she hissed. "You are just a bitter, jealous girl who cannot stand that her sister is special. That is why you are alone. That is why you work in a warehouse. Because you have no grace. You have no worth." The words were designed to hurt, but they missed. I knew my worth. "I feel sorry for you," I said quietly. "You are so empty." That was the trigger. Victoria's hand moved faster than I expected. It was not a calculated strike. It was a spasm of pure rage. Her open palm connected with the left side of my face with a cracking sound that echoed off the tile walls. It was not a playful slap. It was a blow. My head snapped to the right. The force of it threw me off balance. I stumbled back, my hip catching the sharp edge of the granite countertop. I gasped, grabbing the counter to keep from falling, the pain in my hip radiating down my leg. I stood there, stunned. My cheek burned like it had been touched by a hot iron. My ear was ringing. I touched my face, my fingers trembling. I looked at her. Victoria was breathing hard, her hands still raised slightly, her chest heaving. For a second, I saw a flash of fear in her eyes, the realization that she had just assaulted another adult. But then, it hardened back into self-righteousness. "You made me do that," she whispered. "You provoked me." Outside the door, the television volume seemed to swell. Brielle hit the high note. "Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace." I looked at the closed door. My father was 10 feet away. He had to have heard the slap. He had to have heard the stumble. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. No footsteps, no door opening, no Neve. "Are you okay?" Just the sound of the choir and the silence of a father who had chosen his comfort over his daughter's safety. I looked back at Victoria. She was adjusting her blouse, composing herself, already rewriting the narrative in her head. She slipped. She was hysterical. I had to calm her down. I did not scream. I did not hit her back. The burning on my face was clarifying. It burned away the last shred of the little girl who wanted to be loved. I realized then that this was not a battle I could win by fighting. If I hit her, I became the aggressor. If I screamed, I became the crazy daughter. I stood up straight, Ignoring the throbbing in my hip, I lowered my hand from my cheek. "Okay," I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm. Even I was surprised by it. Victoria blinked, confused by the lack of tears. "Okay," she repeated. "I know where we stand now," I said. I turned around and walked to the sliding door. I opened it. The music flooded in. Silent night, holy and mocking. I walked past the dining table. My father was staring into his wine glass, his knuckles white as he gripped the stem. He did not look up. I picked up my purse. I picked up my coat. I did not take the wine. I did not take the chocolates. I walked out the front door into the freezing December air. I got into my car, my face still throbbing, my heart pounding a rhythm of cold, hard resolve. I did not drive back to the city that night. I checked into a Motel 6 on the highway. I sat on the bed, holding a bag of ice to my face, and I made a promise to myself. I would never go back there as a victim. The next time I walked through those doors, I would not be the daughter seeking approval. I would be the disaster they never saw coming. Victoria thought the slap was the end of the argument. She did not know it was the opening bell of a war she was not equipped to fight. Because while she had anger, I had logistics, and I was about to route a very specific delivery to her doorstep. The bruise on my cheek lasted for 11 days. The bruise on my soul, however, hardened into a structural pillar that would support the weight of the life I was about to build. I left Maple Ridge with a single suitcase and a bank account that contained exactly $4,212. I drove east until I hit the ocean. Harborview was not a pretty city. It was a city of salt, steel, and shipping containers. A place where the wind whipped off the Atlantic with enough force to strip paint. It was perfect. It was a place for people who wanted to work, not for people who wanted to pose. I rented a studio apartment that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and old carpet, and I took the first job I could find. It was a mid-level dispatch position at a small medical courier service called QuickMed. It was chaotic, it was inefficient, and for someone like me, who saw the world in grids and flows, it was an irresistible puzzle. For 6 months, I watched the chaos. I saw vital medications sitting in the back of vans that were stuck in gridlock. I saw drivers doubling back on their routes, wasting fuel and time while elderly patients waited for insulin. I saw the waste, and it made my skin crawl. It reminded me of my father's house, a place where appearances mattered more than function, where energy was expended on drama rather than solution. I started staying late. I was not paid for overtime, but I did not care. I pulled the data logs. I mapped the delivery points. I realized that the problem was not the drivers. The problem was the algorithm. The software they were using was reactive, not predictive. I pulled 2 colleagues into a conference room one Tuesday night. Mark was a back-end coder who lived on energy drinks, and Sarah was a data analyst who was too shy to speak in meetings but wrote code like poetry. "We can fix this," I told them, spreading a map of the city across the table. "We can build a dynamic routing system that adjusts in real time based on traffic, weather, and the urgency of the medical payload. We can cut delivery times by 40%. They looked at me. They saw the intensity in my eyes, the same intensity that Victoria had called rough and unfeminine. But here, in the blue light of the server room, it was not unfeminine, it was leadership. We quit our jobs 3 weeks later. We worked out of my studio apartment for the first 4 months. We ate cheap noodles and drank bad coffee. We called it Circuit Bridge. The premise was simple: medical logistics that treated every package like a transplant organ. We were not just moving boxes, we were moving life. To understand the system, I had to understand the ground truth. I did not want to be a CEO who sat in an ivory tower. I wanted to be on the road. So, twice a week, I put on a Circuit Bridge jacket and rode along with our new drivers. That was how I met Noah Carter. Noah was 32 years old, a former Army transport specialist who had done 3 tours in logistics overseas. He was quiet. He did not feel the need to fill the silence with chatter. When he drove, his hands were steady on the wheel at 10 and 2, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. I rode in the passenger seat of his van on a rainy Tuesday in November. We were delivering dialysis supplies to a row of townhouses on the west side. "You take the corners wide," I noted, looking at the tablet on my lap. "It saves on tire wear, but it adds 3 seconds to the turn." Noah glanced at me, then back at the road. "If I take the corner tight with this payload, the liquid shifts," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It changes the center of gravity. Taking it wide keeps the load stable. Stable load means no breakage. No breakage means the patient gets their medicine. 3 seconds is the price of safety." I looked at him. He understood. He understood that logistics was not just about speed. It was about the integrity of the promise we made to the recipient. That was the day I stopped riding with other drivers and only rode with Noah. We developed a shorthand. He knew when I was thinking, and he respected the silence. He knew when I was stressed, and he would simply turn up the heat in the cab without saying a word. But those ride-alongs gave me something else, something darker. They gave me a window into the homes of the people we served. We delivered mostly to the elderly and the sick. I would walk up to these houses, sometimes grand, manicured estates, sometimes crumbling walk-ups, and I would see the people inside. I saw the loneliness etched into their faces as they signed for their packages. I saw the houses that were pristine on the outside, with perfect lawns and expensive wreaths, but inside, they smelled of neglect and sadness. I saw the Victoria facade everywhere. I remember one delivery to a wealthy widow in the historic district. She opened the door wearing a silk robe, her hair perfect, a smile plastered on her face. But behind her, I could see piles of unopened mail and a house that felt devoid of warmth. She thanked me with a voice that was too high, too bright, performing happiness for the delivery girl. It made me sick. It made me determined to succeed, not just to make money, but to build a fortress where I would never have to fake a smile again. Circuit Bridge exploded. The algorithm worked. We cut delivery times by 52% in the first year. We secured contracts with the 3 largest hospital networks in the state. Then, the regional government hired us for vaccine distribution. I stopped living in the studio apartment. I stopped eating noodles. But I did not stop working. 3 years after I left Maple Ridge, a multinational logistics conglomerate made an offer to acquire Circuit Bridge. The negotiation took 3 days. I sat across the table from men in $3,000 suits, men who looked at me and saw a young woman they thought they could intimidate. They did not know I had been negotiating for my existence since I was 7 years old. We closed the deal for $92 million. My share, after taxes and paying out my co-founders and early investors, was enough to ensure that I would never have to ask anyone for anything ever again. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a sports car. I bought the penthouse at Skyline Crown Residences. I bought it through a shell company named Vantage Logistics LLC. I did not want my name on the building registry. I did not want a single soul in Maple Ridge to know that the failure daughter was now one of the wealthiest women in Harborview. The apartment was my victory lap. $6.8 million of glass, steel, and silence. I walked into the empty space the day I got the keys. The air conditioning was humming. The view of the ocean was endless. I stood in the center of the living room and screamed. It was a primal, guttural sound that had been trapped in my throat since Christmas Eve 3 years ago. I screamed until my throat was raw, letting the sound crash against the soundproof glass. Then, I stopped. I adjusted my blazer, and I went back to work. Even though I had sold the company, I stayed on as a consultant. I kept my access. I kept my eyes on the data. Control is not something you give up easily when you have spent a lifetime without it. Every Christmas Eve, I established a ritual. I would stand on my balcony, 40 stories up, and look down at Liberty Plaza. I would watch the crowds. I would listen to the faint strains of the choir singing Silent Night. Sleep in heavenly peace. The lyrics would drift up, and every single time, I would feel the phantom sting on my cheek. I would hear Victoria's voice. "You are ungrateful. You are nothing." I was not nothing. I was the owner of the sky. But the anger was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I kept in touch with my father. In a way, I sent him money. The transfers were mechanical. $2,000 here, $1,500 there. He never asked where it came from. He assumed I had a decent manager job now. He never asked about my life. He only talked about his problems. The leaking roof, the broken furnace, the cost of Victoria's medical needs, which I suspected were mostly cosmetic treatments and spa days. I paid them. I paid them because it was easier to pay than to engage. It was a tax I paid to keep the guilt at bay. But logistics teaches you to look for patterns, and patterns, when you look closely, often reveal crimes. It started with a hunch. I knew Victoria had taken over as the treasurer of the Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund, a charity run by the church to help elderly parishioners with medical bills and groceries. It was exactly the kind of position she coveted. High visibility, maximum praise, zero oversight. I began to wonder. My father was always short on cash, yet Victoria's social media, which I checked from a burner account, showed a life of increasing luxury. New designer handbags, a remodel of the guest bathroom, a pilgrimage trip to Italy that looked more like a 5-star vacation. Where was the money coming from? My father's pension was fixed. My contributions covered the bills, but they did not cover Prada. I decided to use the tool I knew best, Circuit Bridge. The charity used our service. Since Circuit Bridge handled logistics for most of the regional support networks, the Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund used our platform to order and deliver medical supplies and nutritional supplements to the elderly. One rainy Tuesday night in December, sitting in my skyloft with a glass of water and 3 monitors glowing in the dark, I decided to audit the account. I logged into the admin backend. I queried the customer ID for the Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund. The screen filled with data, thousands of rows of deliveries, diapers, Ensure shakes, walkers, oxygen tanks. I filtered the data. I sorted by delivery address. Most of them were legitimate, addresses of known nursing homes or small cottages on the poorer side of town. But then I saw it, a pattern. Order number 7742. Item: high-end ergonomic massage chair. Cost: $4,200. Billing: Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund. Corporate card. Delivery address: 42 Oak Street, Maple Ridge. My breath caught in my throat. 42 Oak Street, my father's house. I kept scrolling. The pattern repeated. Order number 8019. Item: case of 24 bottles of premium vintage wine, labeled in the system as nutritional supplements liquid. Cost: $1,800. Billing: Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund. Delivery address: 42 Oak Street. Order number 9221. Item: 75-inch OLED television, labeled as visual aid equipment for senior center. Cost: $3,500. Billing: Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund. Delivery address: 42 Oak Street. I sat back in my chair, the light from the monitors reflecting in my eyes. She was not just mean, she was a thief. Victoria was using the charity account, money donated by the community to help freezing, starving old people, to furnish her own home. She was ordering luxury goods through the Circuit Bridge system, mislabeling them as medical aids, and having them delivered to her door. She was stealing from the very people I had spent years trying to help. She was stealing from the widows I saw in my ride-alongs, the ones who had to choose between heating their homes and buying their medicine. And she was doing it using my system. I looked at the screen, the anger that had been simmering for years, the personal hurt of the slap, the resentment of being the outcast. It all shifted. It transmuted into something colder and much more dangerous. It was no longer just about a stepmother who hated her stepdaughter. This was about a predator who was feeding on the vulnerable. I thought about Noah. I thought about his strict moral code, the way he treated every package like a sacred duty. I thought about the grandmother I had never been allowed to see, living in a facility that probably relied on funds like this. Victoria had made a fatal error. She thought she was just cheating a faceless corporation. She did not know that the CEO of the logistics company she was exploiting was the same girl she had slapped in her kitchen. She had built her life on a foundation of lies and fake piety. She had used Silent Night as a soundtrack for her abuse. I printed the logs. The printer hummed in the silence of the penthouse, spitting out page after page of incriminating evidence. I picked up the stack of papers. They were warm. I am not just going to leave this time, I whispered to the empty room. I am not just going to succeed in silence. I picked up my phone. I navigated to the driver roster. I found Noah Carter. He was now the lead driver for the Maple Ridge sector. I typed a message, then deleted it. This needed to be precise. I opened the order entry screen. I was going to send one final package to 42 Oak Street, but this time, the delivery would not be a massage chair or a case of wine. This time, the delivery would be the truth. And I knew exactly who I wanted to deliver it. The plan formed in my mind, sharp and complete. I would go home for Christmas, but I would not be bringing a peace offering. I would be bringing an audit. The victim was dead. The architect was awake, and the walls of the Larson house were about to come tumbling down. The notification regarding the small family gathering arrived at 6:42 in the evening. I was sitting at my desk, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the dark living room, my finger hovering over the approve button for a $200,000 grant to renovate the heating system of a nursing home in North Dakota. Christmas Eve this year will just be Dad, me, and Brielle. You are probably too busy anyway. I read the message again. The cruelty of it was precise, engineered to look like consideration, but the timing was the real knife twist. Here I was, authorizing a fortune to keep strangers warm in a state I had never visited, while my own father was being hermetically sealed inside a house that was running on stolen charity funds. I did not reply immediately. I approved the North Dakota grant. Click, money moved, lives improved. That was simple. The situation in Maple Ridge, however, required a different kind of logistics. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 3 months. It rang 4 times before a shaky voice answered. Hello? Is that you, Neva? It was my grandmother, Edith Larson. She lived in a small assisted living facility 2 towns over from Maple Ridge. She was the only person in the family who had ever tried to slip me a candy bar when Victoria wasn't looking. But age and distance had weakened her influence. Hi, Grandma, I said, keeping my voice steady. I was just calling to wish you a Merry Christmas. Are you going to Dad's house this year? There was a pause on the line. I heard the rustle of paper, like she was holding a letter. Oh, no, dear, she said, her voice sounding thin. Victoria sent me a lovely card, though. She said the house is undergoing some renovations and it wouldn't be safe for me with my walker. She said they are keeping it very small, just the immediate family. Renovations, another lie. I had just seen the order logs. The only thing being renovated was Victoria's collection of electronics and wine. I see, I said. Did she send anything else? Well, Grandma hesitated. She sent the annual appeal for the Senior Support Fund. You know, the one David is supposed to be running. She said the fund is very low this year, and they are at risk of cutting services if the family doesn't chip in. I sent a check for $500. It is most of my pension for the month, but Victoria said it was urgent. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. $500. Victoria was shaking down an 80-year-old woman living on a fixed income, telling her the fund was empty, while sitting in a massage chair bought with that very fund's money. Grandma, I asked, my voice dropping, who signs the checks for the fund? Is it Dad? It used to be, she said, but lately, Victoria says David's eyes are getting bad, so she handles the paperwork. To be honest, Neve, I have asked to see the quarterly reports a few times. As a donor, I am supposed to get them, but Victoria always says the printer is broken, or the accountant is on vacation. It worries me. Your grandfather started that fund 40 years ago to help people buy coal in the winter. It was never meant to be. Complicated. It is not complicated. Grandma, I said, staring at the spreadsheet on my screen where Order 9221, 75-inch OLED TV glared back at me. It is criminal. What did you say, dear? Nothing. I lied. Listen, Grandma, I am going to fix this. I promise. But I need you to trust me. Do not send another cent. And if anyone asks, you haven't spoken to me. I hung up. The silence in the penthouse was heavy, charged with a static electricity that felt like a storm front. I had the motive. I had the data. Now, I needed the operation. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard wall in my home office. I uncapped a black marker. I did not draw a family tree. I drew a supply chain map. Node A, the source, my bank account. Node B, the transit, circuit bridge logistics. Node C, the destination, 4202 Oak Street. Node D, the recipient, David Larson. Disruption agent, Victoria. Victoria relied on two things to maintain her power: isolation and appearances. She isolated my father so he wouldn't see the theft. She maintained appearances so the town wouldn't suspect the rot. She thought she was safe because she controlled the narrative inside the house. So, I had to break the narrative. I had to bring the outside world into her kitchen in a way she could not dismiss and could not hide from. I sat back down at my computer. I opened my personal banking portal. I checked my balance. Then, I opened the donation portal for the Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund. I was about to make a donation that would be impossible to ignore, but it came with strings, heavy, steel cables of strings. I typed in the amount, $25,000. In the donor comments and special instructions field, I typed in capital letters: restricted donation for medical equipment upgrade, per fund bylaws. Section 4. Receipt must be physically signed by the founding license holder, Mr. David Larson. Delivery of physical goods to match invoice required upon signature. I wasn't just sending money. I was sending a shipment of high-end mobility scooters and portable oxygen concentrators, actual medical equipment that the fund was supposed to be buying. I placed the order through Circuit Bridge, linking the donation to the purchase order immediately. The total weight of the shipment was 400 pounds. This wasn't a padded envelope that could be slipped through a mail slot. This was 3 pallets. This required a truck. This required a driver to enter the property, unload the gear, and get a signature. And not just any driver. I picked up my phone again. I opened the secure messaging app we used for Circuit Bridge internal comms. I scrolled to Carter. Noah, ID 8842. He was currently marked as off-duty, but I knew he picked up holiday overtime whenever he could. Nava V. Hey Noah, are you booked for Christmas Eve night? The reply came in 30 seconds. Noah C. I was planning to take the late shift. Double pay. Why? You need something moved? Navaya V. I have a code red delivery. Maple Ridge. It needs to land at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. It is personal. Noah. I need a driver I can trust to follow protocol to the letter. Noah C. Send the manifest. What is the protocol? I took a deep breath. This was the dangerous part. If I told him too much, I made him an accomplice to a personal vendetta. If I told him too little, he might be walking into a lion's den unprepared. Nevea V. The protocol is compliance and safety. I need you to wear the full uniform. I need the body camera active and recording from the moment you step off the truck until you are back in the cab. I need you to initiate the audio backup on your handheld device. The recipient is difficult. There is a high probability of verbal aggression. I need you to stand your ground. Be polite, but do not leave until David Larson, and only David Larson, signs for the goods. If anyone else tries to sign, you refuse. The 3 dots of his typing indicator bobbed for a long time. Then, Noah C. Is this the house with the lady who always complains about the packaging? The one with the wreath that looks like it costs more than my van? He remembered. Of course he remembered. Nevaya V. Yes, that is the one. Noah C. Copied. I will be there at 8. Camera rolling. Audio hot. Whatever happens, I get it on tape. Nevaya V. Thank you. Noah, just be careful. If things get physical, you back away. But keep the camera facing the aggressor. Noah C. Copy that. Boss, I have handled worse than angry suburban housewives. I will see you on the logs. I set the phone down. The trap was set. Now, I needed the ammunition. I turned back to the printer. I accessed the circuit bridge database again. I pulled the last 12 months of delivery logs for the 42 Oak Street address. I highlighted every single fraudulent item: the massage chair, the wine, the TV, the designer bedding, the espresso machine. I printed the invoices. Then I went to the state registry website and downloaded the public tax filings for the charity, which showed 0 administrative costs and full disbursement to the needy. I printed those too. Finally, I printed the chat logs from the internal system where Victoria, using the charity's account login, had left notes for drivers like "leave at side door," "do not ring bell or hide package behind the planter, so husband does not see." She had left a digital paper trail of her own deception, assuming that no one at the logistics company would care enough to read the notes. She didn't know the logistics company belonged to her stepdaughter. I organized the papers into a crisp, black leather folder. It was thick. It felt like a brick in my hands. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15. I went to my bedroom and opened the closet. I bypassed the soft, comforting sweaters I usually wore. I reached for a tailored black blazer, a white silk shirt, and dark trousers. I pulled out my boots, the ones with the heavy heels that clicked authoritatively on hard floors. I was not dressing for dinner. I was dressing for court. I packed a small bag. In it, I placed the folder. I also placed a small, high-fidelity lapel microphone. I had bought it weeks ago for a conference, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. I would clip it inside my jacket, connected via Bluetooth to my phone, which would be recording to a cloud server. Noah had his camera. I would have my audio. I walked out to the balcony one last time. The wind was howling, whipping the snow around the skyscrapers of Harborview. Below, the city was a grid of lights, a perfect system of movement and energy. I thought about the last time I was in that kitchen. I thought about the sting of her hand. I thought about the way I had stumbled, looking at my father, begging him with my eyes to say something, to do something, and I thought about his silence. He had let her hit me because it was easier than fighting her. He had let her steal from his mother because it was easier than checking the books. He had let her erase his daughter because it was easier than making space at the table. Well, tonight, easy was off the menu. I gripped the railing. If she touches me again, I thought, the cold air filling my lungs, if she so much as raises a hand to me tonight, it will not be a family secret whispered in the kitchen. It will be a felony assault recorded in high definition, witnessed by a third party, and backed up by a mountain of fraud evidence. I was going to give Victoria exactly what she always wanted, an audience. I went back inside, grabbed my keys, and headed for the elevator. The drive to Maple Ridge was 4 hours. That gave me exactly enough time to rehearse my opening statement. The silent part of the night was over. It was time to make some noise. The drive to Maple Ridge usually took 4 hours, but tonight, the road felt like a tunnel stretching back into the past. I parked my car a block away from the house at 7:45 in the evening. I sat in the silence of the driver's seat, the engine ticking as it cooled. I was wearing a thick wool coat, charcoal gray, professional and armored. Underneath the lapel, taped securely to the silk lining, was the small high-fidelity microphone. I pulled out my phone and checked the connection. The audio levels were green. It was recording. I took a breath that rattled slightly in my chest. I was 26 years old. I was a CEO. I had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, but as I stared at the yellow light spilling from the windows of 42 Oak Street, I had to remind myself that I was not walking in there as a daughter. I was walking in as a prosecutor. I stepped out of the car and walked the block to the house. The snow crunched under my boots. The air was biting, freezing the moisture in my nose instantly. I did not knock. I used my key. The door swung open, and the wave of heat and scent hit me. Cinnamon, roasting meat, an expensive perfume. It was the smell of a perfect Christmas, manufactured for an audience of none. In the living room, The television was blaring. It was the live stream from the church. On the screen, Brielle was standing at the pulpit, bathed in golden light, singing the second verse of Silent Night. Her voice filled the room, trembling with a vibrato that I knew she had practiced for weeks. Shepherds quake at the sight. Glories stream from heaven afar. My father was sitting in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes fixed on the screen with a glazed, distant expression. Victoria was standing by the fireplace, adjusting a garland. When she saw me, her hands froze. The smile she had been wearing for the empty room dropped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure, unfiltered annoyance. Then, the mask clicked back into place. "Nava," she said, her voice high and tight. "We did not expect you. I thought you were too busy with your work." She made the word work sound like a dirty habit. I closed the door behind me, cutting off the wind. "I made time," I said, my voice steady. "It is Christmas. Victoria. I wanted to see Dad." I walked past her, ignoring the stiffening of her posture, and went straight to my father. He looked up, blinking as if waking from a dream. "Nava," he said, his voice thick. "You came." I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy cream envelope containing the paperwork for the $25,000 donation. "Merry Christmas." "Dad," I said, pressing it into his hand. "I wanted to give this to you personally. It is a donation to the Senior Support Fund, but I have made it very specific. It is under your name. I want to make sure the money goes exactly where you intended it to go when you agreed to be the face of the charity." I said it loudly. I said it clearly. The microphone on my chest picked up every syllable. Victoria moved instantly. She stepped between us, her eyes darting to the envelope in David's hand. "Oh, that is sweet," she said, reaching for it. "I will put that in the office for safekeeping. You know your father gets confused with paperwork these days." I blocked her hand with my shoulder. It was a subtle move, but firm. "No," I said. "Dad can hold it. It requires his signature. Victoria, not yours." The air in the room changed. The fake warmth evaporated. Victoria stared at me, her nostrils flaring. She realized that I was not here to play the role of the silent ghost. I was here to rewrite the script. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. It was exactly 8 o'clock. The sound was sharp, cutting through the televised hymn. Victoria let out a huff of irritation. "Who on earth is bothering us at this hour?" she snapped, probably one of the neighbors wanting to borrow sugar. Honestly, people have no boundaries. She marched to the door and yanked it open. Noah stood there. He looked imposing in the doorway, framed by the falling snow. He was wearing his full circuit bridge uniform, the dark blue jacket with the reflective silver logo on the chest. He was holding a clipboard, and behind him, on the porch, were 3 large, heavy boxes stacked on a hand truck. On his chest, the small green light of his body camera was blinking. On top of the highest box, his phone was positioned face down, the audio recording app running. "Delivery for Mr. David Larson," Noah said. His voice was deep, professional, and carried into the house. "Priority shipment from Circuit Bridge Logistics." Victoria stared at him, then at the logo, then back at me. Her face turned a mottled shade of red. She recognized the logo. It was my company. She looked at the boxes, then at the envelope in David's hand, and she put the pieces together. She did not see a generous donation. She saw an insult. She saw her stepdaughter using her dirty warehouse money to invade her home and undermine her authority. "You have got to be kidding me," she hissed, turning on me. "You ordered a delivery? On Christmas Eve? You just had to make a scene, didn't you? You just had to interrupt Brielle's solo to show off your little truck company." "It is medical equipment for the fund." "Victoria," I said calmly. "I do not care what it is," she shouted. "Get in here." She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into the wool of my coat. She yanked me toward the kitchen. This was it, the kill box. I let her pull me. I needed her to feel like she was in control. I needed her to feel safe enough to take the mask off. She dragged me into the kitchen. Noah stepped into the foyer, pushing the hand truck forward so that the stack of boxes acted as a doorstop, keeping the front door wide open. He stood there, silent and watchful, his camera angled perfectly down the hallway toward the kitchen. Victoria pulled me past the dining table and into the kitchen, shoving me toward the island. She went to slam the sliding pocket door that separated the kitchen from the hallway, but she was moving too fast, too angry. She slid it shut, but it bounced back on its track, leaving a gap of about 4 inches. It was enough. It was a clear line of sight for sound. It was a window for the truth. In the living room, the television was still going. Son of God, love's pure light. Brielle sang. Victoria did not care about the song anymore. She turned on me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Who do you think you are?" she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. "You come waltzing in here with your cheap coat and your arrogance, throwing money in my husband's face? You think you can buy his affection? You think you can humiliate me in my own house?" I stood still. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice was ice. "I am not humiliating you," I said. "I am auditing you." "Excuse me?" She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "I know about the fund, Victoria," I said. "I know about the massage chair. I know about the wine. I know about the TV in the living room. I know you cut Grandma off because she asked to see the books." Her eyes widened. For a second, she looked terrified. But then, the narcissism took over. The belief that she was untouchable, that I was just a nuisance to be swatted away, overrode her self-preservation. "You are lying," she spat. "You are a jealous, ungrateful little brat. I raised you. I fed you. And this is how you repay me? By inventing stories? By trying to poison your father against me? You stole from the elderly." "Victoria," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure the microphone caught every frequency, "you used my father's name to steal money from people who are freezing to death, and you used my company to deliver the goods to this house." "Stop it!" she shrieked. She looked around the kitchen, desperate for a weapon, desperate to silence me. The song from the other room swelled, radiant beams from thy holy face. "You are nothing!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are just a sad, lonely girl who nobody wants. That is why you are here. That is why you are trying to ruin our Christmas. Because you cannot stand that we are happy. You cannot stand that Brielle is a star and you are just the help." I did not flinch. "I am not the help." I said, "I am the CEO of the company that delivered your stolen television, and I am the daughter of the man you are manipulating." That broke her. The reality of my status, the reality that I was not beneath her, shattered her control. She lunged. It happened in slow motion. I saw the intent in her eyes. I saw the shift in her weight. She shoved me hard with both hands. I stumbled back. My lower back hit the edge of the granite counter, the same place I had hit 2 years ago. Pain shot up my spine. My elbow knocked into a crystal wine glass sitting on the drying rack. The glass fell. It hit the tile floor with a shattering crash that sounded like a gunshot in the confined space. But she did not stop at the shove. Victoria swung her right hand. It was a wild, desperate strike. Her palm connected with the side of my face, hard. Slap. The sound was sickeningly loud. It was the sound of flesh hitting flesh, amplified by the acoustics of the kitchen. I reeled back, gripping the counter to keep from falling onto the broken glass. My cheek burned with a familiar, terrible fire. Victoria stood there, chest heaving, her hand still raised. Her face was contorted with hate. "You ungrateful bitch!" she screamed. "I wish you had never come back." In the living room, the song reached its final, soft conclusion. Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Victoria's ragged breathing and the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. And then, a voice cut through the air. It was deep, calm, and terrifyingly authoritative. "Ma'am?" We both froze. Victoria spun around toward the hallway. Through the 4-inch gap in the door, we could see him. Noah had moved. He was no longer at the front door. He was standing right outside the kitchen, his tall frame blocking the light. His body camera was glowing with a steady red eye, pointed directly at us. He did not look like a delivery driver anymore. He looked like a soldier. I heard glass breaking. Noah said. His voice was level, devoid of emotion, reciting the safety protocol like a weapon. And I heard shouting. I am required by corporate policy to verify the safety of the recipient before completing a delivery. He looked through the crack, his eyes locking onto Victoria. Is everything secure here? He asked. Or do I need to contact emergency services? Victoria's face went white. She looked at Noah, then at the camera on his chest, then at me. She realized, finally, that the audience was not empty. She smoothed her hair. Her hands were shaking violently. The transformation was grotesque. She forced her mouth into a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. Oh, she said, her voice trembling. Oh, no. Everything is fine. We had a little accident. My stepdaughter dropped a glass. She is so clumsy. She turned to me, her eyes pleading, threatening, begging. Right, Nevaeh? Just a clumsy accident. I stood up straight. I touched my cheek. It was hot. I looked at Noah through the gap. I saw the anger in his eyes, tight and controlled. I looked at Victoria. I reached into my coat and tapped the microphone. I looked back at Noah. Please complete the delivery. Noah, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the person who signed his paychecks. I am ready to sign. Victoria let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She thought she had survived. She thought I had covered for her. She had no idea that I had just let her hammer the final nail into her own coffin. The air in the kitchen was brittle, like sugar glass waiting to shatter. Victoria was breathing in shallow, jagged gasps, her chest rising and falling beneath her silk blouse. She wiped her hands on her skirt, a nervous tick that betrayed the terror pulsing underneath her performative smile. Noah stood in the doorway, a monolith in his blue uniform. He did not step inside, but he did not step back. He held the clipboard out, not to Victoria, but toward the space between us. I need a signature for the receipt of goods, Noah said. His voice was flat, devoid of the deference Victoria was used to receiving from service workers. He was not asking. He was commanding. And I need to verify that the recipient, Mr. David Larson, is present to accept the donation as per the manifesto. Victoria let out a shaky laugh. It sounded like dry leaves scraping together. Of course, she chirped. David, come here. My father shuffled into the hallway from the living room. He looked between us, at Victoria's flushed, frantic face, at my burning cheek, and at the imposing driver. He blinked, confused by the heavy, silent violence hanging in the air. What is going on? He asked, his voice slurping slightly from the whiskey. Just sign the paper. David, Victoria snapped, then caught herself, softening her tone into a sickly sweetness. It is the delivery Nevaeh ordered, for the fund. Just sign so the nice man can leave. David took the clipboard. He squinted at the paper. $25,000, he muttered. That is a lot of equipment. Noah pointed a gloved finger at the signature line. Right there, sir. And I need to confirm that you are the primary license holder for the Maple Ridge Senior Support Fund. Yes, David said, signing his name with a shaky hand. That is me. Thank you, Noah said. He took the clipboard back. He tore off the yellow carbon copy and handed it to my father. Then, he looked up. His eyes bypassed Victoria completely. They landed on me. He looked at the left side of my face, where the skin was already beginning to swell and darken. His expression did not change. He was too professional for that. But his eyes tightened at the corners. It was a microscopic shift, a signal broadcast on a frequency only survivors can hear. I saw it, his eyes said. I have it. He gave me a single, sharp nod. It was not a bow. It was a salute. Have a safe evening, Noah said. He turned on his heel and walked back out into the snow. The door closed, but the cold draft lingered. Victoria slumped against the counter as soon as the latch clicked. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out of my house before I call the police and tell them you assaulted me." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had terrorized my childhood, and I felt nothing. No fear, no sadness, just the cool, detached assessment of a prosecutor looking at a guilty defendant. "I am leaving. Victoria," I said, my voice calm, "but I am not running away." I walked past her. I did not look at my father. I could not bear to see the confusion in his eyes, the willful blindness that he wrapped around himself like a blanket. I walked out to my car, the snow crunching under my boots. My hands were steady as I unlocked the door. I sat in the driver's seat and locked it. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Circuit Bridge internal secure messaging app. Noah C., delivery complete. Body cam footage and audio backup have been uploaded to the secure cloud server. Timestamp 8 o'clock and 12 minutes. Note: subject exhibited signs of physical aggression. Victim identified as N. Larson. Evidence is locked. If you need a formal incident report for legal purposes, say the word. I stared at the screen. A tear finally escaped, hot and angry. Tracking down my unbruised cheek, I typed back 2 words. "Thank you." I drove to the Holiday Inn on the outskirts of town. It was a nondescript beige building next to the highway. I checked in, ignoring the curious look the receptionist gave my red, swollen face. "I walked into a door," I said flatly. She didn't believe me, but she gave me the key card anyway. I went to my room, threw my coat on the bed, and sat at the small desk. I opened my laptop. I logged into the Circuit Bridge admin portal. There it was, the file. Incident 42 Oak Street, Deck 24, MP4. I put my headphones on. I pressed play. The video was crisp. The wide-angle lens of the body cam captured the open door, the hallway, and the sliver of the kitchen through the gap. But the audio was high-definition terror. I heard my own voice, calm and steady. "You stole from the elderly. Victoria." I heard her scream, "You are nothing! You are just the help." And then, the sound, the sickening, wet crack of her hand hitting my face, the crash of the wine glass, the gasp of pain. And underneath it all, weaving through the violence like a golden thread, was Brielle's voice singing Silent Night from the television. "Sleep in heavenly peace." I listened to it 3 times. The first time, I shook. The second time, I took notes. The third time, I felt the shift. The Nevaeh who wanted a mother died in that hotel room. The Nevaeh who built empires rose from the ashes. This was not a domestic dispute. This was evidence. I did not sleep. I spent the night organizing files. I pulled the bank statements I had printed. I matched the dates of the fraudulent purchases to the dates of Victoria's social media posts. July 12th. Purchase of patio furniture set. $3,000. Billed to charity fund. July 14th. Facebook photo of Victoria on her new patio. Caption: "Blessed to have such a sanctuary." I built a timeline. It was ruthless. It was undeniable. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Christmas Day, I checked out of the hotel. I did not go to my father's house. I drove 20 miles south to the assisted living center where Grandma Edith lived. The lobby was quiet, smelling of pine sol and stale coffee. A few residents were sitting by the plastic Christmas tree, waiting for families that might not come. I went to room 204. Grandma Edith was awake, sitting in her armchair, reading a Bible. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, then immediately filled with worry as she saw my face.
"Neva," she gasped, struggling to stand up. "My God, child, what happened? Did you get into a car accident?"
I went to her and gently pushed her back into the chair. I sat on the ottoman in front of her. "I need you to listen to me, Grandma," I said, "and I need you to be strong, because what I am about to show you is going to hurt, but it is going to save us."
I opened the laptop.
I did not start with the video of the slap. I started with the numbers. I showed her the spreadsheets. I showed her the invoices. This is where the money went. Grandma, I said, pointing to the rows. It didn't go to coal. It didn't go to medicine. It went to her house. It went to her wardrobe. She has been draining the fund for 5 years. Grandma Edith stared at the screen, her hands trembling. She put on her reading glasses. She traced the lines with a thin, paper-dry finger. But, she whispered, David said the fund was just struggling because of the economy. He said donations were down. Donations are up, I said, but expenses are up too. Personal expenses. Then, I played the audio. I let her hear Victoria screaming. I let her hear the accusation. You stole from the elderly. I let her hear Victoria's non-denial, her pivot to abuse, and I let her hear the slap. Grandma Edith did not look away. She listened to the end, to Noah's voice cutting through the chaos. When it was over, she closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of grief for the son she had lost to this woman, and rage for the legacy that had been tarnished. She hit you, Grandma whispered. She hit you in David's house. And he did nothing? I shook my head. He did nothing. Grandma Edith opened her eyes. The frailty was gone. In its place was the steel of a woman who had raised 3 children during a recession and buried a husband. Get me the phone, she said. Who are you calling? I asked. I am calling the church council, she said, her voice hard. I am calling Deacon Miller, and I am calling the bank. But it is Christmas Day, Grandma. I do not care if it is the second coming, she snapped. Theft is theft, and abuse is abuse. Hand me the phone. I handed it to her. I watched as she made 3 calls. She did not sound like an old woman in a nursing home. She sounded like the matriarch she was. She demanded an emergency meeting of the board on the 26th. She demanded a freeze on the fund's assets. When she hung up, she looked at me. You need a lawyer, she said. Not a family lawyer, a shark. I have one, I said. I stepped out into the hallway and dialed the number of Marcus Thorne. He was the corporate attorney who had handled the acquisition of Circuit Bridge. He cost $800 an hour, and he was worth every penny. He answered on the second ring. Merry Christmas, Neve. I hope this is a social call, but knowing you, the building is on fire. Not the building. Marcus, I said, but I have a situation. I need you to file a case for embezzlement, fraud, and assault. I have audio, video, and a paper trail that goes back 5 years. Who is the target? He asked, his tone shifting instantly to professional alert. My stepmother, I said, and potentially my father, as an accessory through negligence. I am sending you the files now. I want the assets frozen before the banks open tomorrow. Send it, he said. I will have the filings drafted by noon. I hung up. I stood in the hallway of the nursing home, looking out the window at the snow-covered parking lot. I was not the girl who cried in the garage anymore. I was not the teenager who took the bus to flee. I was a tactician. I had lined up my pieces, the lawyer, the matriarch, the witness, the evidence. Victoria thought she had slapped a disrespectful daughter. She did not realize she had slapped a lawsuit. I spent the rest of the day with Grandma. We ordered Chinese food. We did not talk about Victoria. We talked about logistics. We talked about the future. That evening, I drove back to Harborview. The city was glowing on the horizon as I approached, a cluster of diamonds rising from the sea. I parked in the underground garage of the Skyline Crown Residences. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse. The silence of the apartment wrapped around me like a cool silk sheet. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair across my face, stinging the bruise on my cheek. Below, Liberty Plaza was quiet. The crowds had gone home, but the tree was still lit, a beacon in the dark. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the world I had conquered. I pulled my phone out and played the recording one last time. Sleep in heavenly peace. I turned it off. I looked at the city lights. This time, I whispered to the wind, the song isn't for me. It is for her, because she is going to need all the peace she can get when I am done with her. Victoria wanted a show? Fine, I would give her the performance of a lifetime. But this time, she wouldn't be the star. She would be the defendant. I turned back to the glass doors of my home, my sanctuary. I had built this banister. I had poured this concrete, and I was done apologizing for standing on it. The war was over. The occupation had begun. 3 weeks after the incident in the kitchen, I hosted a dinner party. It was the first time in 10 years that I had set a table for more than one person, and it was the first time in my life that I set a table without fear. The elevator to the penthouse chimed at 6 o'clock in the evening. The doors slid open, revealing a group of people who looked like they were stepping onto an alien planet. There was my grandmother, Edith, leaning on her walker but dressed in her Sunday best. Behind her were Aunt Sarah and Uncle Ben, my father's younger siblings who had been slowly, methodically pushed out of the family orbit by Victoria over the last decade, and trailing behind them, looking like he would rather be facing enemy fire than a social gathering in a $6.8 million apartment, was Noah Carter. I stood by the door, wearing a simple silk blouse and trousers. My cheek had healed, leaving no mark, but the memory of the bruise was what had paid for this evening. "Welcome," I said, smiling. "Come in." They stepped into the foyer. I watched their eyes. Usually, when people entered the skyloft, they looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows first. They looked at the view of Harborview glittering below, but my family looked at the space. They looked at the lack of clutter. They looked at the airiness of it. Edith walked in, her tennis balls gliding over the polished concrete floor. She stopped in the center of the living room. She looked at the 12-foot Christmas tree I had kept up, decorated not with gold ribbons and pretension, but with simple, warm white lights and glass ornaments that caught the reflection of the city. She looked at the dining table. It was a single slab of reclaimed walnut, long enough to seat 12. There was no kids' table in the corner. There was no head of the table. It was just a long, continuous surface, set with simple white porcelain and linen napkins. "You live here?" Aunt Sarah whispered, clutching her purse. "Nevaeh, this is a spaceship." I laughed. "It is just an apartment, Aunt Sarah. It is home." I had hired a private chef for the evening. Her name was Maria, a woman in her 60s who ran a small catering business in the neighborhood. I had given her very specific instructions. I did not want foam. I did not want deconstructed vegetables. I did not want anything that required a degree to eat. I wanted the food that Victoria forbade. The air in the apartment did not smell of expensive, cloying potpourri. It smelled of roasting chicken with rosemary. It smelled of butter and garlic. It smelled of apples stewing in cinnamon and brown sugar. It smelled like the memory of a home we had all lost before Victoria moved in. "Please, sit," I said, gesturing to the table. "Anywhere you like. There are no assigned seats here." They sat down tentatively. Noah took a seat near the end, looking uncomfortable. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Noah," I said, "you are not on the clock. You are the guest of honor. Relax." He gave me a small, tight smile. "I am just not used to being on this side of the delivery. Nevaeh, usually, I drop the box and run. Tonight, you stay," I said. Dinner was served family style. Huge platters of golden brown roast chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes that were whipped with heavy cream and butter until they were clouds, and roasted root vegetables glazed with honey. For the first 20 minutes, the only sound was the clinking of silverware and the sighs of genuine contentment. It was the sound of people who were used to being fed scraps, emotionally and literally, finally being offered a feast. Uncle Ben took a bite of a dumpling from the chicken soup and closed his eyes. "My God," he said, "this tastes like what Mom used to make before. Well, before." Grandma Edith nodded, her hand trembling slightly as she held her spoon. "Victoria never let us serve potatoes like this," she murmured. "She said starch made people sluggish. She always served that dry quinoa salad." The mention of her name sucked the air out of the room for a second. The tension that had been underlying the reunion bubbled up. We were not just here to eat. We were here to prepare for war. I put my fork down. I looked at the faces around the table. Faces that shared my father's nose, my grandfather's chin, faces that I had missed. I know why we are all here, I said quietly. And I know you all have questions. You want to know why I called the meeting for tomorrow. You want to know if what Grandma told you on the phone is true.
Aunt Sarah looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed.
Nevaeh, she said, is it true? Did she really? Did she hit you? And the money? I nodded to Noah. He reached under his chair and pulled out a small portable speaker. I had connected it to my phone. I am going to play something for you. I said, my lawyer, Marcus, advised me to keep the full video sealed until the deposition. But you need to hear this. You need to understand that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system. I pressed play. The audio was clear. It cut through the warmth of the room like a razor blade. You stole from the elderly, Victoria. You are nothing. You are just a sad, lonely girl who nobody wants. And then the slap. I watched their faces. Uncle Ben's jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. Aunt Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. Grandma Edith stared at the centerpiece, her eyes hard and wet. But the most telling reaction was the lack of surprise. There was shock at the violence, yes, but there was no shock at the cruelty. I knew it, Aunt Sarah whispered, tears spilling over. I knew something was wrong. Every time I called David, she would stand right there. I could hear her breathing on the line. She told me David didn't want to see us because we were bad influences. She told me I was too loud, too messy for their new life. She told me I was asking for handouts. Uncle Ben said, his voice low and angry, I asked to borrow a tool from the garage 5 years ago, a wrench. She told me David said I was a leech. I never went back. I stopped the recording right before Noah's entrance. She built a wall around my father. I said, and she used his name to build a throne for herself. She took the money meant for heating bills and medicine, and she bought loyalty. She bought the image of the perfect family. I looked at Noah. And she would have gotten away with it forever, I said, if Noah hadn't been standing at the door. Everyone turned to Noah. He shifted in his seat, his face flushing slightly. I just did my job, he mumbled. No, Grandma Edith said. She reached across the table and placed her wrinkled hand over his large, rough one. You did more than your job. Son, you rang the bell. You have no idea how long we have been waiting for someone to just ring the bell and interrupt her. The mood at the table shifted. The anger remained. But it was no longer a heavy, suffocating weight. It was a shared burden. It was the relief of validation. For years, each of them had thought they were the problem. They thought they were the ones who weren't good enough. Now, they knew the game was rigged. We finished the meal. We ate the apple pie, which was warm and smelled of cinnamon, reclaiming the scent that Victoria had weaponized with her expensive candles. After dinner, I opened the sliding glass doors to the balcony. Come outside, I said. You have to see the view. We stepped out into the winter night. The wind was cold, but the heat radiating from the city below kept it from being biting. We stood along the railing, 40 stories up. Below us, Liberty Plaza was a square of light. The Christmas tree was still lit. A tiny, glowing triangle. The skaters on the rink were moving dots. Grandma Edith gripped the railing. She looked down at the city, then back at the warm, glowing apartment behind us. She looked at the long table where we had all sat together. You know, she said softly, her voice catching in the wind, when you left Maple Ridge, I thought we had lost you. I thought you would just disappear into the world. I put my arm around her shoulders. I almost did. Grandma. She looked at me. Her eyes reflected the city lights. But you didn't, she said. You built this. You built a balcony big enough for all of us. You built a place where no one has to stand outside in the snow looking in. I looked at my family. Uncle Ben and Aunt Sarah were laughing, pointing at a landmark in the distance. Noah was standing a little apart, looking out at the horizon, but he looked peaceful. This is what I wanted. I realized, not the money, not the penthouse. I wanted the ability to choose who sat at my table. I wanted the power to protect the people I loved from the people who hurt them. Tomorrow is going to be hard. I said to the group, we are going to walk into that church meeting, and Victoria is going to try to destroy us. She is going to lie. She is going to cry. She is going to say we are a mob coming to tear down a saint. Let her try, Uncle Ben said, crossing his arms. I have got 5 years of missed birthdays and insults to settle. We are not a mob, I said firmly. That is important. We are not going there to scream. We are not going there to humiliate her the way she humiliated us. I looked at Noah. We are going there to deliver the truth. I said, we are going to lay out the facts, the bank statements, the audio, the video, and we are going to let the truth do the work. The group nodded. There was a solemnity to it. It felt like the night before a battle, but a battle we knew we were going to win because we had the superior map. As the night wound down, and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Ben went inside to get their coats, Grandma Edith stayed on the balcony with me. She turned to me. The wind whipped her silver hair around her face. Nava, she said. Her voice was serious now. The warmth of the apple pie was gone. Yes, Grandma? Tomorrow, when you play that tape, and when you show those papers, Victoria is going to fall. She is going to fall hard. I nodded. I know. But David, she said, her voice cracked. David is going to fall with her. He signed the checks. Nevaeh, even if he didn't know, he signed them. He is liable, and he is going to be broken. He is going to realize that the last 15 years of his life were a lie. I looked down at the plaza. I had thought about this. I had thought about it every night. I know, I said. Edith grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You have the power to destroy them both, she said, and God knows, you have the right. But I want you to remember something. Your father is a weak man. He is a coward, but he is not evil. He was drowning, and she was the only raft he saw. She squeezed my hand. When you bring the house down tomorrow, she whispered, make sure you leave a door open for him. The goal is to save David, not to bury him in the rubble with her. I looked at her. It was the hardest thing she could have asked me. Part of me wanted to burn it all down. Part of me wanted my father to suffer for every time he looked away while I was being erased. But then I looked back inside. I saw Noah helping Aunt Sarah with her coat. I saw the warm light of the lamp. I saw the table where we had broken bread. I had built a balcony, and a balcony is useless if you don't open the door for people to step onto it. I promise. Grandma, I said, I will give him a choice. She patted my cheek, the same cheek Victoria had slapped. Good girl, she said. Now, let's go inside. It is cold up here, and we have a big day tomorrow. We walked back into the warmth. I locked the balcony door behind us. The key felt heavy in my pocket. Tomorrow, I would use a different key. Tomorrow, I would unlock the cage Victoria had built around my father, and I would see, once and for all, if he had the strength to walk out of it. The city slept below us, humming with electricity, but in the penthouse, for the first time in my life, there was no silent night. There was the sound of family, loud and messy and real, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The meeting of the Maple Ridge Church Council took place in the small multi-purpose room behind the main sanctuary. The walls were covered with corkboards displaying photographs of past charity events. In almost every single picture, Victoria was in the center, wearing a benevolent smile and holding a check or a ribbon. It was a shrine to her vanity, masquerading as a record of service. I sat at a metal folding table on the left side of the room. My hands rested on the black leather folder containing the audit. Next to me sat Marcus Thorne, my attorney, whose suit cost more than the annual budget of the Sunday school. On my other side was Grandma Edith, sitting upright, her jaw set like granite, and near the door, acting as a silent sentinel, sat Noah. He had traded his uniform for a crisp white button-down shirt, but he still looked like he could lift a refrigerator if he needed to. The door opened at 10 o'clock in the morning. Victoria entered. She was wearing a cream-colored wool suit and a string of pearls. She walked with the confident, gliding stride of a woman who believes she owns the building. Behind her walked my father, David, looking pale and diminished in a gray suit that seemed a size too big for him. Brielle brought up the rear, looking less like a star and more like a confused extra who had wandered onto the wrong set. Victoria surveyed the room. She offered a tight, pitying smile to Grandma Edith and ignored me completely. "Good morning, everyone," Victoria said, placing her purse on the table at the front of the room. She turned to the council members, 5 men and 2 women who had known her for years. "I am so sorry we had to gather on the day after Christmas. I know how precious family time is. It is truly unfortunate that we have to address these malicious rumors started by estranged family members who are clearly going through a mental health crisis." She gestured vaguely toward me, casting me as the unstable villain before the opening credits even rolled. I remained silent. I did not shift in my chair. Deacon Miller, the chairman of the council, cleared his throat. He was a stern man who ran the local hardware store. He did not smile back at Victoria. "This is not a social call. Victoria," Deacon Miller said, "we are here to review a formal complaint filed regarding the financial management of the Senior Support Fund. Please, sit down." Victoria's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She sat, pulling my father down into the chair next to her. "Well," she said, smoothing her skirt, "I am happy to clear this up. The fund is in excellent shape, despite the difficult economic climate." "Mr. Thorne," Deacon Miller said, nodding to my lawyer, "the floor is yours." Marcus stood up. He did not shout. He did not pace. He opened his briefcase and took out a single stack of papers. "Thank you." "Mr. Chairman," Marcus said. His voice was smooth, deep, and terrifyingly calm. "We are not here to discuss the economic climate. We are here to discuss the specific allocation of funds under the supervision of Mrs. Victoria Larson." He slid a packet of papers down the table to the council members. "If you look at page 1, Marcus continued, you will see a summary of withdrawals over the last fiscal year. You will notice a series of purchases labeled as medical equipment and nutritional aid. These purchases total $42,000. Victoria let out a scoff. "Yes, medical equipment is expensive. We help a lot of people." Marcus ignored her. "If you turn to page 2, you will see the corresponding invoices provided by the logistics carrier. Circuit Bridge, order number 9221, labeled as visual aid. The item delivered was a 75-inch OLED television. The delivery address was 42 Oak Street, the residence of the treasurer." The room went deadly silent. The council members flipped the page. Marcus continued. "Relentless. Order number 8019, labeled as liquid supplements. The item delivered was 24 bottles of vintage Cabernet. Delivery address, 42 Oak Street, order number 7742, labeled as therapeutic seating. The item delivered was a luxury massage chair. Delivery address, 42 Oak Street." Victoria stood up, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. Those were temporary storage. The church basement was damp. I was holding them at my house for safekeeping before distribution." Marcus looked at her over his glasses. "For 2 years?" he asked. "And I assume the wine was also for the seniors?" "It was for communion," she shouted, her voice rising. "It was for special events. This is nothing but a clerical mix-up. I handle all the paperwork myself. Sometimes things get mislabeled. It is a simple accounting error." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is what this is really about. She is doing this to hurt me. She has always been jealous of me. She is angry because I raised her, and she turned out to be a failure. She is ungrateful. She is trying to ruin her father's reputation just to get back at me for trying to discipline her." She looked at the council members, tears welling up in her eyes on command. "You all know me," she pleaded. "You know how hard I work. Are you going to take the word of a bitter, estranged daughter over mine?" I looked at Deacon Miller. He looked conflicted. The evidence was there. But Victoria was a master manipulator. She was spinning a story of an ungrateful child attacking a martyr. I stood up. "Mr. Chairman," I said. My voice was steady. "May I present one final piece of evidence? It addresses the character of the accused and the nature of her discipline." Victoria glared at me. "You have nothing. Navaya, just lies." I took my phone out. I connected it to the Bluetooth speaker Noah had placed on the table. "This was recorded 48 hours ago," I said, "in the kitchen of 42 Oak Street." I pressed play. The sound filled the small room. "You stole from the elderly." Victoria. My voice, calm and accusing. "You are nothing." Victoria's voice, screaming, distorted by rage. "You are just a sad, lonely girl who nobody wants. That is why you are here. Because you cannot stand that Brielle is a star, and you are just the help." The council members stiffened. They had never heard Victoria raise her voice. They had only seen the smiling saint. This was the voice of a monster.
And then, the sound. The slap. Crack.
It was violent. It was undeniable. And immediately following it, the sweet melodic sound of Brielle's voice singing from the television. "Silent night. Holy night. All is calm. All is bright." I let the recording play until Noah's voice cut in. "Ma'am? I heard glass breaking." I stopped the audio. The silence in the room was heavier than the pallets of medical gear I had donated. Victoria was trembling. She looked around the room, but no one met her eyes. That is illegal," she shrieked. "You cannot record me in my own home. That is a violation of privacy." "It is not," Marcus said calmly. "The recording was captured by a Circuit Bridge employee during the execution of his professional duties, in compliance with corporate safety protocols regarding aggressive recipients, and the audio corroborates a pattern of abuse and financial misconduct." Victoria turned to David. "David, tell them she provoked me. Tell them she is lying." My father sat there, staring at the table. He did not move. Noah stood up. He didn't ask for permission. He just stood, his presence commanding the room. "I grew up in a house like that," Noah said. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I spent half my childhood hiding under the kitchen table while my father screamed at my mother. I know what that sound is." He looked directly at Victoria. "I am a driver. I am supposed to deliver the box and walk away. But when I heard a grown woman being struck in her face while a hymn played in the background, I could not walk away. If that is what she does to an adult who can fight back, I can only imagine what she does to the people who depend on that fund." He sat down. All eyes turned to David Larson. My father slowly lifted his head. He looked at me. For the first time in years, he really looked at me. He saw the woman in the expensive suit, but he also saw the ghost of the little girl who used to hide in the garage. He remembered the times I came home with red eyes. He remembered the times I said I am fine when I clearly wasn't. He looked at the papers on the table, the proof of his wife's greed. He looked at Victoria, who was now clutching his arm, her nails digging into his jacket. "David, please," she whispered. My father stood up. He pulled his arm away from her. It was a small movement, but it severed a decade of control. "She didn't provoke you." "Victoria," he said. His voice was raspy, like a machine that hadn't been used in years. "She was trying to give me a donation." He looked at the council. "I signed the checks," he said quietly. "I did not look at what I was signing. I just wanted peace in the house. I chose the easy way. And because I was weak, my daughter paid the price, and this church paid the price." He looked down at Victoria. "It is over," he said. Victoria stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. The realization hit her. The prop she had used to prop up her image had just walked off the stage. Deacon Miller stood up. "Victoria Larson," he said formally, "effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties regarding the Senior Support Fund and any other church committees. We will be initiating a full external audit of the fund's accounts going back 5 years. The fund's management will be temporarily transferred to an oversight committee led by Mrs. Edith Larson." Victoria stood up. She looked at me. Her face was no longer a mask of rage. It was a mask of ruin. "You," she whispered, "you did this. You destroyed everything I built." I looked her in the eye. "No, Victoria," I said, "I did not destroy anything. I just returned the truth to the people you used to build your throne. And as for what you think is yours, it never belonged to you in the first place." I picked up my folder. I walked out of the room. I did not look back. I waited in the main sanctuary. It was empty, the stained glass windows casting long, colorful shadows across the wooden pews. It was quiet, a real silence, not a suppressed one. 10 minutes later, the door opened. My father walked in. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had just survived a shipwreck but lost his luggage. He walked down the aisle and stopped a few feet away from me. He didn't try to hug me. He knew he hadn't earned that yet.
"Neva," he said. "Dad?" I replied.
"I am so sorry," he said. His voice broke. "I am so sorry I let her treat you like that. I am so sorry I let her push you out. I was afraid of being alone." "I know," I said. He looked at his hands. "I do not know what happens now," he said. "The lawyers, the audit. It is going to be a mess. I might lose the house." "You might," I said. He looked up at me. Is there any place for me in your life? Or is it too late?" I looked at him. I remembered Grandma Edith's words. The goal is to save David, not to bury him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small silver key. It was the spare key to the penthouse. I walked over and placed it in his hand. "This is a key to my home," I said. "It opens the door to a place where there are no lies. Dad, there is no yelling, there is no hitting. It is a place where you can stand on a balcony and see the whole world." He closed his fingers around it. "But there is a condition," I said. "You cannot bring the past with you. You cannot bring her with you." I stepped back. "I am not asking you to decide today. You have a lot to clean up. But you have a choice now. You can stay in the wreckage of the lie you lived for 15 years. Or you can step onto the balcony with the people who actually love you." I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the church. "The choice is yours, Dad." I walked out into the sunlight. Noah was waiting by my car. He opened the door for me. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I looked back at the church one last time. "Yes," I said. "I am ready." 1 year later, the landscape of my life looked very different. The audit was brutal. Victoria avoided jail time only by agreeing to a plea deal that required full restitution and community service. Ironically, cleaning the very church she used to rule. She was stripped of her titles. She moved to a small apartment in a neighboring town. Brielle sent me an email 6 months after the explosion. It was long, rambling, and full of excuses, but it ended with a sentence that felt real. "I am tired of singing for an audience that doesn't care. Can we get coffee? Just as 2 women?" We met. It was awkward, but it was a start. And David? It was Christmas Eve again. I stood on the balcony of the skyloft. The wind was cold, but the fire pit was roaring, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Grandma Edith was sitting in a plush chair, wrapped in a blanket, drinking cider. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Ben were laughing near the heater. Noah was standing next to me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were building something new, something slow and steady, like a well-planned route. Below us, the choir in Liberty Plaza began to sing. "Silent Night, Holy Night." I closed my eyes. The song didn't hurt anymore. It was just a song. I heard the sliding glass door open. I turned around. My father stepped out onto the balcony. He was wearing a new coat. He looked healthier, lighter. He was holding a tray of appetizers. He walked over to the group. He smiled at Grandma Edith. He shook Uncle Ben's hand. He walked over to me. "Merry Christmas, Neve," he said. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I said. I looked over at the wall by the door, where a row of hooks held our keys. There, hanging right next to mine, was the silver key I had given him in the church. It wasn't in his pocket. It wasn't in a drawer. It was on the hook. He used it every Tuesday for dinner. He had chosen the balcony. I turned back to the railing and looked down at the city. The lights blurred into a sea of stars. I had built this. I had fought for this. And now, finally, the silence was truly peaceful. I looked directly into the camera of my mind, speaking to the thousands of people who might be listening to this story in the dark. If you have ever been the one left out in the cold on a holiday night, if you have ever been the one sitting at the small table, I want you to tell me right now, what city are you in? What time is it? And then, I want you to ask yourself a question. You have two choices. Option A, you can stay silent, accept the scraps, and let them erase you. Or option B, you can build yourself a balcony so high that the noise can't reach you, and then only open the door for the people who are brave enough to climb up there with the truth. Which one will you choose? Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to share this journey with you. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button, and if you really want to help us out, press the hype button so more people can hear about building their own balconies. Stay strong and keep climbing.